This is a painting Gluck did in 1936 of herself and the love of her life, Nesta Obermer. Gluck's the one in front. She called the picture Medallion, or the you-we picture, or their marriage picture. And it's a defiant declaration of same-sex love. They've kind of merged into one, and they gaze into the future. And it's got something of the feel of revolutionary art, strong faces and determined jaws. Dark clouds gather, but they'll overcome and see their way. Nesta's eye gleams with the distant light, and she leads and Gluck follows with her barbered haircut. It's a strong statement even for now, and for 1930s patriarchal England, when women struggled to exist other than in relation to men, it's quite something. Love prompted Gluck to paint it. On the 23rd of June 1936, a Tuesday, she and Nesta went to Fritz Busch's production of Mozart's opera Don Giovanni at Glyndebourne. They sat in the third row of the stalls, and Gluck felt the intensity of the music merged them into one and matched their passion. She spent the night with Nesta, who had a house 7 miles away at Plumpton. Nesta's husband was abroad. And then when Gluck got back to her studio in Hampstead, she began work on You-We. My own darling wife, she wrote to Nesta, my divine sweetheart, my love, my life, I have just driven back in a sudden, almost tropical downpour in keeping with my feelings at leaving you. I made straight for the studio and tried to be busy, except everything seems so utterly unimportant that isn't us or connected with us. Gluck's surviving letters to Nesta were all written in 1936 and early 1937. They were among her papers when she died, folded in a red Charles Jourdain shoebox. They were written in ink on airmail paper and mostly undated, except for notes like Wednesday morning in bed, 7:15 a.m., or later the same day. Nesta must have returned them when their time together ended. And there's no record of Nesta's letters to Gluck, and perhaps they agreed to give them back to each other. I don't think there's another work quite like You-We. I first saw it at Gluck's memorial exhibition at the Fine Arts Society in London in 1981, 37 years ago, before lesbians existed. let alone all the other things and the pluses. I wanted to know what was going on, though I sort of knew: defiance, desire, falling in love, trouble. And it was this painting which led me to write my biography of Gluck, which was first published in 1988. This doesn't half date me, doesn't it? There wasn't anything much written about her beyond brief notes for her exhibition catalogues. Writing her life story back then, and in a curious way her whole life story is coded into this painting, was my way of showing allegiance and coming out. I was working as an editor at the BBC at the time. I'd written reviews and short stories, and out of the blue I got a letter from the director of Pandora Press, a feminist publisher, saying she liked what she'd read of mine and did I have a book under the bed or that I wanted to write. I thought again of Gluck and I got a commission. Gluck's nephew and executor, Roy Gluckstein, let me have access to her papers. These have been archived now, but back then he'd stored them unsorted in 2 big cardboard boxes in his garage. And he let me take these boxes home. I was living in a small top-floor flat in Maida Vale, and I lugged them up the stairs, and they smelled musty. And I remember saying to myself, make a life out of that. And then when I started looking at the letters, I couldn't read the handwriting. And they all called each other nicknames like Darling Grub, or Hig, or Little Tim, or Dearest Rabbit Skin Snooch Bun Snoo. I tell you, writing lesbian biography is hell. But after a while, I sorted things out. Book publishing was very different 30 years ago, before the digital age. Colour printing was expensive. I was only allowed 4 pages of colour. And even mention of same-sex relationships made a lot of people curl in their boots. There wasn't much in the way of queer literature or queer art. And I wanted mainstream readership. So I felt a pressure to be circumspect. Back then you could frighten off publishers and readers with words like lesbian and trousers. 30 years on, I'm glad my biography of Gluck's still in print, and I'm especially glad it's paved the way for new takes on her work and identity, and many of these you'll hear about from the speakers today. Insights that are relevant to a more outspoken, a more open and questioning society, to the wish to understand and accept diverse identities and different ways of living and loving and using language. Neither Gluck nor Nesta's young in this picture. Both had packed in a fair amount of living. Gluck's 41 and Nesta's 43. There was semantic license in Gluck referring to Nesta as her darling wife. While Gluck was in her studio painting this marriage portrait, Nesta had joined her elderly moneybags husband, Seymour Obermer, on the ski slopes in Switzerland. He was a businessman, fabulously wealthy, and 30 years older than she was. They were socialites and travelled the globe. He didn't like hearing any mention of Gluck, and Nesta had no wish to upset him. Gluck initially was unfazed by this other husband, and she bombarded Nesta with letters. Darling heart, we are not an affair, are we? We are husband and wife. I have never said or written eternity before. I have never again, as I have said to you over and over again, felt it before. I was always looking for you, always hoping against hope for you. But never in my inmost heart did I think I had found you until I really did so. Until you, I count my life a dream, and do not feel I even became conscious or began to live until I met you and claimed you. There's lots of letters like that. I'll give you a bit of background to Gluck's life before we. The other speakers will give you much more detail. I've forgotten how I pushed the thing forward. Will somebody help me? Gluck, she was in English. Which one do I press? Oh, yeah, that one, do I? Oh, all right. Gluck was an English society painter, hugely successful in the 1920s and 30s. She dressed in men's clothes and relished the startled comments her androgynous or masculine appearance caused. She had lots of photographs taken of herself. That's her by Emil Hoppe in 1926. That's her in 1924 by Howard Coster, photographer of men. That's her by Angus MacBean in the 1930s. She chose her own gender-neutral monosyllabic name, and on the backs of prints of her paintings sent out for publicity, she always wrote, "Please return in good condition to Gluck." No prefix, no suffix, no quotes. Gluck was her symbol, her signature of identity, and a symbol that took her outside of gender. And she gave the example of the painter Rex Whistler, who'd sign his work with a butterfly. She had her hair cut short at a gentleman's hairdresser, got her shirts from Jermyn Street, and blew her nose on large linen handkerchiefs monogrammed with a G. She did several self-portraits. There was this jaunty and defiant one in beret and braces. It was stolen from the back of a car in 1981, apparently. And this one, now in the National Portrait Gallery, which was used as the poster for the recent Queer British Art Exhibition at Tate Britain. She painted it when the Yui love of the marriage portrait failed. Lesbian women gravitated together in the 1920s and 30s, but their interaction isn't well documented because of the repressive climate and censorship laws. That's a portrait the lesbian artist Romaine Brooks painted of Gluck in 1926. Romaine called it Peter, a young English girl, and they did reciprocal portraits of each other. Gluck called hers of Romaine, it's a rotten print, called hers of Romaine Mrs. Romaine Brooks. And these were wry gender jokes between them, because Romaine was long separated from her lavender cover-up marriage to Mr. Brooks. Gluck's portrait was unfinished because they quarrelled and Romaine stormed out of the studio. By dressing as she did, Gluck made her sexual orientation public, set herself apart from society, alone with what she called the ghost of her artistic ambition, and she distanced herself from her family's expectations for her. That's Gluck when she was 4. That was how her family defined her. Girl. What is she thinking? That's her mother and father on their wedding day. She was born Hannah Gluckstein in 1895 into the family that founded the J. Lyons and Company catering empire. 1895 was the year Oscar Wilde was imprisoned for gross indecency. The Glucksteins owned the Lyons Corner House tea rooms, most of the posh London hotels, the Trocadero, the Cumberland, the Strand Palace. They were rich, patriarchal, Jewish. The expectation was that their daughter might dabble in the arts, but would marry well, preferably a cousin, be a good wife and mother, especially to her sons, and a credit to her husband in the frocks and pearls he bought her. Gluck wasn't having any of it. She early on rejected her hated name, started calling herself Peter, resolved to be an artist, started smoking a pipe and dressing in men's clothes. Dearest Louis, she wrote to her brother in 1918, I'm flourishing in a new garb, intensely exciting. It was designed by yours truly and carried out by a mad dressmaker, utterly loony. I hope you'll like it because I intend to wear that sort of thing always. In 1918, she ran off to Cornwall with an artist called Craig. That's Gluck's portrait of Craig, and her parents were beside themselves. In their view, their daughter was masquerading as a man. In her view, she was expressing the identity she felt to be hers. Her father despaired at what he called her outre clobber and said the unhappiness she made him feel was too strong for philosophy. Her mother talked of a kink in the brain and thought that when she left the pernicious influence of Craig, all would be well. In Cornwall, Gluck joined the Newlyn group of artists, Laura Knight and Alfred Munnings. She painted Cornish scenes, and in London, that's Craig on the rocks in Cornwall. And in London, she painted theatre scenes. That's the actor Ernest Thesiger, who was a friend, and he was gay but married his lover's sister as a cover-up. Gluck very quickly had enough work for a solo exhibition. She had her first exhibition in 1926 and at regular intervals after that. And the prestigious Fine Arts Society in London took her on. Most reviewers commented more on her appearance than her work. She'd only show her work in what she called the one-man shows. And the tiered frame she designed was the only one she'd allow for her pictures. That's Bettina, who was a lover of Romaine Brooks's partner, Natalie Barney. So there's a code of gay complicity going on in a great deal of Gluck's work. She wanted control of every aspect of her life, her work, her appearance, her identity. Her father didn't withhold money from her despite his disapproval, and she kept a studio in Cornwall throughout her life. And in 1926, she bought a Georgian house in Hampstead Village, Bolton House, and she had a state-of-the-art modern studio built to her specification at the end of its garden. She had a chauffeur to take her down to Cornwall, and she had servants, so she wasn't exactly chucked out on her ear. She was never without a woman in her life, and her paintings before We reflected her life with other lovers. After Craig and Cornwall, Sybil Cookson moved into Bolton House. Sybil Cookson was a journalist who specialised in sport and legal trials, So Gluck painted boxing scenes and court cases. Trouble came when Sybil found Gluck, as she put it, in the wood shavings of the new studio with Annette Mills. And Sybil moved out that night. So I was surprised to find out about that affair, because I remember Annette Mills from my childhood on Children's Hour with Muffin the Mule. We Want Muffin, Everybody Sings was her signature tune. Dear old Muffin playing the fool. It's a lesbian anthem, that. They were even later on a 20p stamp. Muffin's got a royal wrap there. It's a bit of a queen muffin. Because historically nobody mentioned lesbians, it's surprising to discover the number of women who were. So sex between women was never illegal like between men. Parliament tried in 1921 to add a clause, acts of gross indecency between women, to the 1885 bill used to indict Oscar Wilde. The clause was defeated in the House of Lords. One of his lordships said 999 women out of 1,000 have never even heard a whisper of these practices, and in the homes of the country are going to tell them there is such an offence and bring it to the notice of women who have never heard of it, never dreamed of it. I think this is a very great mischief. Silence is best. So silence ruled, and it's a deadly weapon and hard to break. The grand old men of England went haywire a few years later in 1928 when Radcliffe Hall published her gloomy, unsexy novel, The Well of Loneliness, about what the sexologist Havelock Ellis termed congenital sexual inversion. That's the first edition. Havelock Ellis wrote a foreword. That's Radcliffe Hall. She's the one on the right. That's her with her partner, Una Troubridge. You can just about see it, but they're both wearing monocles on strings around their necks. And the monocle was a code, like a ring on your pinky finger. There was a famous lesbian club in Paris in the 1920s called the Monocle. The sexiest thing that happens in the Well of Loneliness is when Radcliffe Hall writes, she kissed her full on the lips, and that night they were not divided. It was too much for the lawmakers, the Home Secretary, the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Lord Chancellor, the Attorney General. They conspired in a kangaroo court to have the book burned in the King's furnace. The editor of the Sunday Express wrote in an editorial that he'd rather give a child of his a phial of prussic acid than let them read this book. The Well was censored. This year's the 90th anniversary of that insult. It's also, of course, 90 years is the anniversary of the date when all women got the vote on as an equal age to men. Back then it didn't put Gluck off. I was equally surprised when I found out about her next affair after Sybil Cookson. It was with Constance Spry, flower arranger to the Queen and the aristocracy. I'd always thought Constance drank tea with her gloves on, but Gluck's relationship with her lasted 4 years, from 1932 to 36, and it took Gluck and her work to the heart of 30s high society. Gluck painted Constance's arrangements of white flowers. It was the time of the all-white living rooms championed by the interior decorator Ciri Morm, and it was a modernist reaction to Victorian gloom, what Gluck called the diarrhea-coloured furniture of her parents' house. Commissions poured in for these flower paintings and for portraits of Constance's clients. Often Gluck's painting would be the sole decoration in a state-of-the-art white drawing room. And one of Constance's aristocratic clients was Molly Mount Temple, the Lady Mountbatten. There's Gluck's portrait of her, painted the same year as the Uwe picture. Molly Mount Temple lived in Broadland, the Mountbatten family home in Hampshire. She was said to be the first woman in London to paint her nails red, and she'd phoned Constance in the morning to order flowers for her dinner table to match what she was going to wear that night. And it was at one of Molly Mount Temple's dinner parties that Gluck first met and then fell in love with Nesta. Gluck and Nesta called her Emte for the way she pronounced her initials, MT. And you can just about see the M for Molly and Mount Temple engraved on her belt. She called at Gluck's studio in 1936 to see this portrait while Nesta was away. Gluck was preparing for her third major exhibition at the Fine Arts Society, and she worked in the studio with the Uwe picture propped in front of her as inspiration and as consolation for Nesta's absence. She liked tantalizing people with the relationship it implied. "Now it is out," she wrote to Nesta, "and to the rest of the universe I say, beware, beware, we are not to be trifled with." Gluck asked Molly Mount Temple what she thought of the Uwe picture. She turned to look at it, and there was a long, pregnant silence, Gluck wrote in a letter to Nesta. Then she said, "Who is the other?" No answer from me, because I thought it too silly to answer. Forced to speak, she said, "Oh, Nesta." More long pause, then turning decisively away, "No, I don't like it. You have made her too male and you too feminine." Later she said about it that it was sinister. "Isn't it comic? I knew it would be a shock, and that originally she would be very jealous, and I'm certain that is the base of her reaction. She said what she hoped would destroy it for me." Tell you what was going on with these women. When Gluck fell in love with Nesta, Constance was unceremoniously dumped. The evening after that fateful visit to Don Giovanni in June 1936, Constance had dinner with Gluck at Bolton House. Throughout their 4-year relationship, she'd always stay there midweek. That night, Gluck told her they could no longer be lovers. The entry in Gluck's diary for the 24th of June 1936 was C, dinner and night, BH, talk and say no more, asterisk. C was Constance, BH was Bolton House, and the asterisk was the asterisk, which was the mark that Gluck made when she'd had sex with her lovers. So they didn't meet anymore, and it was the end of a relationship that had encouraged Gluck's talent, furthered her career, and taken her to the heart of 1930s high society. At some point, Gluck and Nesta exchanged rings, and Gluck was so sure of her future with Nesta that she burned her past, letters, photographs, even some canvases that showed past lovers or were reminders of them. "It's the purest heaven to know how bright the future is going to be," she wrote to Nesta. "You see, dear love, just now I want to start such a new life that anything even vaguely smelling of the past stinks in my nostrils." She said she felt a sense of freedom in the unencumbered rooms, the past reduced to ashes, and in possession of love that makes me blaze with a fire that I do not believe even death will be able to quench. What a tangle, what jungles we have had in our lives, Gluck wrote, and now it all seems crystal clear and unmistakable and real, without question, merely with a few roots to stumble over, a few brambles to cut away before reaching freedom and light. There were quite a few roots and brambles, not least that Nesta already had a Mr. Obermer and a life with him. She spoke of the marriage as not meaning much to her, but she made no move to end it. Gluck's love for Nesta, obsessive, jealous, and without context, was of the sort that comes to grief in life and in the opera. They had fun times. There they are skating in Switzerland and skiing and huddling up. "Just this, beloved, nothing but happy pictures since Uwe," Gluck wrote to Nesta as she painted pictures for her 1937 show. Noel, utterly unlike any other of her paintings, celebrated Gluck's first Christmas with Nesta in 1936. She bought the streamers and blue frilled paper from Woolworths. The white mask that you can see in the top left-hand corner was the one she'd torn as she put it on Nesta's head on Christmas Day. It's a bit like a warning amid all that frippery. Gluck said she wanted the picture to reflect her new sense of freedom. She didn't draw first, but painted directly, feeling very robustious, she said, and cracking crackers to get in the festive mood. The picture took her 4 months, but she wanted the whole thing to look as if it had been dashed off in a moment. She wanted the cake to look homemade. I don't think Gluck ever made a cake in her life, actually. And the whole thing to convey childlike delight. At times she thought it the limit of banality, but in the end she declared herself pleased and gave it satisfied and slightly bloated looks as she drank tea and wrote to Nesta. She wanted it to hang beside You We in her 1937 show. Gluck wanted shared domesticity as proof of commitment. She bought an anchor for the punt in which they spent romantic afternoons on Nesta's private lake at Plumpton. She painted them smooching in the punt, the end of the punt stretching out like a bright path to infinity. The director of the Fine Arts Society thought the picture suggestive and wouldn't include it in the 1937 exhibition. There's photos of the more chaotic reality of their punting. The You We double portrait was shown at Gluck's hugely successful 1937 exhibition at the Fine Arts Society. It was hung among her exquisite flower paintings of Constance Spry's decorations and conventional portraits. That's the room at the Fine Arts Society. And the Queen went to the exhibition. The Queen, the court column wrote, accompanied by Lady Helen Graham, paid an informal visit to the Fine Art Gallery to see the exhibition of paintings by Gluck. Her Majesty, who was wearing a swagger suit of peacock blue velvet with a hat of the same colour, spent a considerable time in the gallery discussing the pictures with the artist. Did they discuss You We, I wonder, and the light in Nesta's eye? And meanwhile, Nesta travelled the globe, and if you read Gluck's letters, after a bit they become dissatisfied. Their gist and reiteration was, I love you, I long for you. They were as uncompromising as You We. But it seemed Nesta had no desire to set up home in England, and that while a love affair with Gluck was one thing, giving up the social whirl and her marriage status was another. You We went the way of operatic love. The finish came after 6 years, not quite eternity, and it broke Gluck's heart. There's the self-portrait of her bereavement and defiance, painted in 1942, when the relationship ended. She buried herself in the countryside in a compromised relationship with a journalist, Edith Heald. There she is in her years with Edith. Nesta went off to Hawaii. She remained friends with Gluck, but You We was over. And for 30 years, Gluck produced very little. She became quite cantankerous, fought an arid battle about the quality of artists' paints, and was all but forgotten. And then in the 1970s, she went into the Fine Arts Society and said to the directors, it's 30 years since I had my last exhibition. Don't you think it's time I had another? Her 1973 exhibition was a huge success. Reviews were excellent. Katharine Hepburn was there and spent an hour talking to Gluck. She could be out to her, if not to the world at that time. Nesta flew in from Hawaii. I really do want to do some good and lovely work before I die, Gluck said. And 5 years after her last exhibition, she died. The directors at the Fine Arts Society asked Nesta if there was anything of Gluck's she wanted. Oh, a few of her fine-haired brushes, Nesta said. So she hadn't lost her knowledge and love of Gluck, it's just they didn't sort it. So it's gratifying that now, 40 years after her death, there's new interest in Gluck and her work. At the end of last year, the Fine Arts Society gave her another show. The recent queer British art exhibition at Tate Britain used her self-portrait for their poster and cover. Claire Bevan's documentary, Gluck, Who Did She Think He Was shown on BBC 4 last December and will be repeated. Amy and Martin have curated the major exhibition about Gluck's work and identity that's on in Brighton and at the museum until March. And the new book that accompanies this exhibition, Gluck, Art and Identity, is being launched today. So Gluck's still contemporary to our eyes, defiant and questioning, and she strikes a chord in the struggle to open up language, gay, lesbian, trans, binary, queer, gender neutral, he, she, cis, they. I think kink's been added now, actually. So I read. 80 years on from when she painted it, the double portrait of her and Nesta remains an iconic image of love and desire between women. Many issues about same-sex relationship are coded in it, and she's out to the world, defying the rules. So it's a courageous image for today, yesterday, and tomorrow. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. Are we going to do questions after each lecture?
Did I go on too long? It was what half hour.
Okay, we'll have questions at the end of the session.
Okay. I don't know how to turn mine off.
It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Gill Clarke. Gill and I met in 2009. You need to wear it. We were both working on exhibitions about the Women's Land Army. I was working on an exhibition about their uniform, and Gill was working on an exhibition about their paintings. And we've stayed in touch ever since. Gill's visiting professor at the University of Chichester, and she's guest curator at the university's Otter Gallery and also at St Barb Museum in Lymington. She's an art historian and curator with a special interest in life writing, and has written many books and curated exhibitions on subjects including Evelyn Dunbar and Marius Schwab, and she specialises on the subject of women and war. Her paper is going to focus upon Gluck's biography and her art and how the two were inextricably entwined.
Forward, I think. Thank you.
Welcome, Gill.
Lovely, thank you.
I don't think I had that one. But
Brilliant. It was perfect. Right. Thank you very much. This has been an exciting opportunity for me working in a team of people because, as Amy said, much of my work, particularly over the last 10 years, has been writing biographies, but as a sole author. So to come to a project which has been ongoing for a year with people looking at Gluck's life in such different ways has really been challenging and stimulating. So I've been grateful to have that opportunity. And I should also say, just by way of background, amongst all of that, my last academic post was at Southampton University about 7 years ago, where I actually taught research methods, and we had one of the first doctorates in biography, and I ran that program. So I bring that sort of background to my interest in artists' lives and 20th century British art. So it's the stories that we tell. We all tell stories about our lives, and Gluck's, of course, is particularly interesting. And so what I want to do is just to, the first slide is just to put up a few challenges that I think are ones that have to be confronted. Of course, the other challenge is actually working out which way the thing goes. I failed dismally. I shall now go back to being a dinosaur, which is where I belong. Me and Diana will sing Muffin the Mule together to you.
oh dear.
Well, it isn't totally me. Okay, I'll use it from here. That's fine. Oh, there is a problem.
It's just switch to reflector 2, whatever. If you click back on PowerPoint on the screen, your picture should work. If you click anywhere on PowerPoint.
Oh, we're all lost.
Something up there that takes it back to escape now. Where's Bray? That's nice.
Thank you.
That should.
Thank you.
If you just... is that gone? Try it now.
Hooray!
Thank you.
I am not a total dork, but you can make your own decisions. Anyway, so what I've just put up here was sort of 5 points or 5 sort of challenges that I see in terms of writing about a life. And of course, they're all interlinked and take prominence at different sort of times. But for me, the real challenge was that notion of the pursuit of a life, rather like a sort of a sleuth or a detective, trying to trace the life, the person that is behind it. Who is Gluck? Who was Gluck? It's those hidden things, trying to reveal those. And it's also about the tracking of footsteps. And for me, in the work that I've done, I've wanted to, as much as I can, to retrace those paths. So it's about going to Hampstead, to Cornwall. So just to try and get as close as I can to almost to have a conversation with that person. But of course, as Henry James says, the problem with death is it hides the sort of the folds, the creases of life. Those get lost. But it's about tracking those footsteps through time and space. And Diana's already mentioned the context of the sort of patriarchy, the 20s, the 30s. And indeed, my own PhD that I did back in the 90s was around lesbian women, when you hardly dare mention the name. But for me, I made a point of putting the L word in all my publications, even though arguably it had an impact on my career at that time. It was the time of Section 28, which for many of you is just sort of history. But for others of us, we lived through that, and the changes are really, they're quite staggering. So it's about time and place and the importance of place. It's also about the sources, and Diana mentioned some of those, but some of those sources are now missing, and that makes it challenging too. They were there in the 80s, but now they are no longer extant or wherever. So it's interrogating those sources, asking questions about them, the credibility of them, the authenticity. It's also the ethics, and for me, with my background, that's been something ever present. It doesn't go away, but it's all about, for me, doing no harm, what you can tell, what you can't tell. And Diana also mentioned the power of silence, and I see that as hugely powerful. Sometimes it's the only thing somebody has is actually to be silent. Writing and representation, that's a huge challenge. How do you turn a fragmented, messy life into something coherent? I think it's something of an art and something to work on. I'm not sure I'm there yet. So to Gluck then, what I wanted to do was to select some of her paintings and use those as a window into her life, because Gluck only painted things that mattered to her, things that moved her, and it became almost like a tyrant that took over. So if I could find those paintings and then try to get behind the narrative of them, perhaps I might be able to offer another way of looking at Gluck's life. So it's been mentioned that Gluck went to Cornwall. She ran away around about 1916. It's the middle of the First World War. It's an interesting time. It's a time when there's conscription being introduced. So she's down there in an artistic community for the first time with a life that is so very different. It was a life that she embraced, but it was a real turning point in her life. And this painting here, Lamorna Inn, that's where she went to in Cornwall, right down on the southwest coast, which was a magnet for artists. The climate, the light, there was the Newlyn School of Painting. It was somewhere where she could be who she wanted to be. And Munnings encouraged her. He was a great painter of horses. This pub, I'll call it. It was also known as the Wink, and Gluck had a fine voice, and I'll come back to that later. Her mother had been a singer. So this is Gluck's work now. Diana mentioned Craig. It was Craig who was a fellow student who she ran away with, her lover. And I was interested in the portraits that Gluck did, because Gluck, she found portraits a strain, and she also tried, and I think she does, get to the very essence, the very character of the sitter. And she said she never posed her sitters. She would study them, she would look at them, and then she would capture them. And here you can see Craig is staring back at her. You see her lovely slender hands, her rings, the coat is pulled up round her neck. And I should say that painting as well, I did an exhibition last year at the Otter Gallery at the University of Chichester about women artists, called Women Artists, Power and Presence. And I had a queer cabinet, and in that I had this portrait that I'd borrowed. And I'm not sure that Gluck would have wanted to have been there with all these other female artists, but she was there. I wanted to have her there as a statement. So the next one is in Cornwall, and I mentioned the importance of place. Cornwall was a place that Gluck returned to. Every year she kept a studio there. It was where she mixed with the Knights, the Proctors, who became particularly good friends. She shared an interest with Laura Knight in the theatre, and we'll see some of that in her paintings later. But you can begin to see her developing skill as an artist. This was done much later, but it shows how deeply felt it was as a place to her, as a landscape. But she didn't want to be labelled as a landscape painter or a portrait painter. She didn't want to be aligned to any school of painting. But you can see here, as you might see with some of her other landscapes, the great expanse of sky, which she felt was influenced by the contours of the earth beneath it. And these are quite small oil paintings, and some of you may have seen some of them at the Fine Arts Society at the show last year. This is the races not far from Lamorna, and it attracted all the artists like Munnings and the Knights to it. And you can see the jockeys there getting ready to race, and the crowds. And again, that sensitive rendering of light and the small strip of landscape below. Now, this was her first show, and I was interested in looking at this as a document as well. I mentioned about the sources that I used, and the catalogues were particularly useful in terms of giving you a feel for the range of the work that she did. And I was also interested in the Dorian Lee galleries. Now, what was that? Who was that? And in doing some of my investigating, if you like, rather, as I said, that notion of being the sort of the detective, discovered that was the pseudonym for Hoppy, and Diana showed that lovely studio portrait of her, and he'd run a number of shows in this gallery. The Nash brothers had shown there before, and it was designed to be a more intimate space than some of the other bigger galleries. So it was probably a good place for Gluck to start. You could see there's there was 57 works shown, and a good proportion of those were of her time in Cornwall. And the press coverage at the time was very interesting. Diana showed you a clip of some of that. Lots of comment about her masculine attire, the clothes, the hair, as well as comments, obviously, about her paintings as well. And she was now beginning to attract attention from the press, and this is one of the journals of the time, Drawing and Design, and the cover of that is of her painting Lady in Mask, though looking at the catalogue when I was sort of going over what I was going to say, I couldn't find that. And it's interesting how some of these paintings, they almost disappear. The titles change as well. It's really very confusing. But they made the point in the magazine that they thought she was an artist who had a great future. These next three slides are of the ballet and the theatre, and again it's picking up on that point of Gluck painting the things that mattered to her, the things that were important to her, and you'll see a slightly different approach in the third one in this. And this show was called Stage and Country, which reflected her two worlds, the sort of the peace, the tranquility of Cornwall, as opposed to the sophistication of London in the 1920s, the roaring 20s. And here you can see Massine is the great Russian dancer, the maître de ballet, and you had all the interest in the Ballet Russe and Diaghilev at that time. Wonderful sets painted by major artists. And this one you saw earlier from Diana, but it shows her friend Thesiger stood rather sort of almost nervously, but very tall, slender, immaculate dress suit, and his face is sort of lit against the backdrop of the curtain, and he's about to say something in a condescending manner to the audience. And these were all part of the Cochrane reviews, which were hugely popular at the time. This is where you see a slightly different style here, and it's got echoes of Vorticism and some of Nevinson's work, the sharp, angular lines, and then the blue-grey modernist stripes. But it's also worth, I think, just reminding ourselves too that Gluck didn't believe in preconceived ideas, and she believed in being uninhibited with her art, I guess, as much as her life. And that's, in a way, why I find her paintings are so interesting and so revealing. The next stage of her life, if you like, and I'm glossing over some of it, and Diana's picked up some of it as well, is this her relationship with Constance Spry. And now you see in her work how her work, her life, the two, art in life, life in art, they're all intertwined. And Constance Spry, a bit like Muffin the Mule for Diana, was a name that was known to me because my mother used to be involved in floral art, as it was called, in the 1960s, and she was the chairwoman of the New Milton Floral District Society, and we had books at home by Constance Spry, and I remember after Mum died getting rid of them, and I wish I'd kept them because I had to borrow one back from the London Library to look at them. We had one signed by Constance Spry, so whether Constance Spry ever came to New Milton in Hampshire, I don't know, but I was very interested, and I thought, gosh, how shocked they would have been to know that Constance Spry was a luscious lesbian. Hey-ho. Anyway, what you see here is Gluck's unsentimental sort of painting of flowers. She had a great love of flowers. There's an elegance to the painting. It's meticulous, and it's really had an impact on the way that people actually look at flowers. This other one, too, of lilies, this was the result of a commission via one of Constance Spry's wealthy friends. And Gluck had been introduced to Gluck by Prudence Morph, who was the wife of Edward Morph, the architect who designed her studio. And what I find fascinating is all these interconnections between people. If you can imagine the underground map, it's a bit like that. They all cross, and these worlds, these webs are just, I find them intriguing. And what you get in that painting too is echoes of the great Dutch flower painters in the 17th and early 18th century. So here is the studio where Gluck was creating her work. And on the left-hand side, you can see there was a grand piano. And I visited her studio, Chantry House in Sussex, where she lived from the late 40s. And there was a piano there too. And I mentioned Lamorna Inn, the Wink, the pub. Gluck had a fine voice too, and I'll mention that as well in a minute. And there she is. I love this photograph of her coming out, so to speak, of the studio there with a fag in her mouth and her palette and carrying one of her paintings before it's gone into the classic Gluck frame. But this studio was designed, it is divine, it was designed by her friend, the artist Edward Morph, and I mentioned his wife. She'd been an artist as well. They were great supporters. And one of the reasons I left Southampton years ago to do more of the writing and the curating, but was also to edit the diaries of Randolph Schwab, who was the head of the Slade from 1930 to 1948. And he was rather like Pepys, the Pepys of the art world, but as someone said, only better. And he makes interesting comments on the people, their work of their time. And so I was fascinated when I went to this index that I'd spent not years, it felt like it, ages on doing. It actually was worthwhile. There were entries to Gluck. So I'd just like to read you from Wednesday, the 9th of December. After dinner, went round to Watts, who had Jimmy Horsfield there, and Mrs. Watts went with us to Gluck's new studio behind Volta House on Windmill Hill, built by Morph. Morph was there too. A good studio, well designed. Gluck sang. An odd woman, dressed like a man except for a short skirt. She has sung professionally at the Christian Science Church in Mayfair and divides her ambition between painting and singing. Her painting is hard and dexterous. And lots of things within that very small entry. But what was fascinating as well in talking with Amy, I think that was one of the few, if only, reference to Gluck actually being in a short skirt. So her studio and house was actually later commandeered in the Second World War, and she had to leave it. But this is a portrait of Miss Watts, the daughter of Arthur Watts, who I mentioned in the diary entry. Her father was an artist. He drew for Punch. He drew for the Radio Times, which at that time had lots of lovely, beautiful illustrations. And Gluck is mentioned again in Schwab's diary. And I'll read you from it because it makes reference to this rather fine portrait. Went to Gluck's show at the Fine Arts Society to see what her portrait of Margaret Watts is like. She is getting a good deal of réclamé, having fitted up the whole gallery with a lining of 3-ply wood, like a built scene on the stage. It is painted white, the pictures are let into it, and heavy strips of wood give a kind of Villister effect at intervals, a good piece of showmanship. So again, it's fascinating insights. And for me, having edited these diaries, you wonder sometimes about the sort of the authenticity of them, what was Schwab's take, but it's then interesting comparing it with what we've heard from Diana, what we've seen, that there is, I think, a degree of, or a high degree of veracity to the things that he's actually saying. So just... I did some work too, again trying to get behind the painting and the backstory of it, about Watts. And she actually became a costume designer and won an Academy Award. I only found this out the other night because I did a bit more, as you do. And she won an Academy Award for her designs in 1969 for Anne of 1,000 Days. So I think the exciting thing for me is that you're always on a journey. When you're following the journey of someone else, it's also a journey of the self as well. This, by now, it's wartime. This is Morph, who designed her studio. And I put this portrait next to this article that was in Architectural Review, because I think it shows you as well Gluck's skill as a portrait artist. When you look at the likeness, you look at the profile, she's really got it, which was something that she tried to do. And you can see why she found them a strain, because she would wait, she would watch until she could find that moment to do it. And behind Morph is one of the most, I suppose for him, well-known buildings that he was the architect for, Guildford Cathedral. And there it is on Stag Hill. And he'd won a competition in 1930s out of about 150, 180 architects to design it, even though it wasn't eventually completed until 1961. And his wife, too, Prudence Morph, who trained as an artist, she was involved in the designs of the kneelers. Behind all these pictures, there are such stories that I could go, if I had the time, I could tell you more about them. So now we're Second World War. Gluck has been living in Plumpton, as Diana said, near to Nesta. She's by now got to know Edith Heald, who'd been a journalist, as had her sister. They were living at Chantry House in Sussex. So Gluck, like other artists, even with her privileged background, the Second World War was starting to hit hard, because as a profession for artists, commissions dried up, galleries closed, materials were in short supply. And she had some correspondence with Kenneth Clarke, who was chairman of the War Artists Advisory Committee, that gave commissions to artists about the possibility of doing some official work. She sent photographs of her work, but was not commissioned. She received a letter back from the secretary addressed to her as Miss Gluck. And from all that you'll have heard this morning, that will not have been well received. We don't know how it was received, but I mean, she must have just been furious. Anyway, she did do paintings then that were close to home. This is of Edith here. I don't know why I've got airplay code. Anyone like to tell me why I've got an airplay code?
Hit the mouse on the purple again.
Hit the mouse on the purple.
Okay. Hit the mouse on, right, okay, I can do that. I can do that. Am I bothered? No. Whoa, cracked it. Gosh, I'm in the 21st century now, thank you. Anyway, here is Gluck, back to the 20th century. I feel much more comfortable there. This is, Heald. This is, she's a fire warden. But by now, 1945, you haven't got the same danger of raids. So most of the work was done at night. She's having a wee nap there. But it tells us something about the period. I love the telephones there. They just are classic. I'd so like to have one. This is an interesting painting. Actually, the title is misleading, because I did a fair bit of sort of tracking down again, trying to find out about this. The 8th Army, the American Army, were actually not in Britain at that time. So I had some correspondence with the archivist, if you like to call him, at the Stenning Museum, as well as the work I was doing myself. There was the Scottish army were around at that time, and there was an 8th company of the 15th Scottish, whatever they were. So obviously there was some sort of juxtaposing there. It doesn't really matter, but it was of interest for me. It's hard trying to find things to say that Diana hasn't said as well, so anyway, hey-ho. So there they are, relaxing, getting on with what you do when you're got some time. This one was painted in the same year. It's unfortunate that this is the best copy we could get. We don't know where this painting is. And this is done in Plumpton, and this is at a WI meeting. And here they are. They're practicing at Jerusalem, and the conductress is, trying to get them all in order before, and she splits the seam of her dress here But what also interested me is the figures there. And given one of the books and exhibitions, and Amy did too, about Women's Land Army, you've got... I hardly dare, I don't know if it's got a remote, I'm not going to bother with it. But you can see the Land girl there with the jaunty hat, the tie. She would have been trained at Plumpton because Plumpton trained Land girls. So poor but quality image, but I think you can get the sense of it. And you can see the variety in her work too, and why she resisted being labelled. So now we're into her last exhibition at the, this was the catalogue for it at the Fine Arts Society, and Diana mentioned that the sort of 50s, 60s for Gluck were a time where she did little work because she was involved in the paint wars. And in fact, when she reflected on it, she felt that she had not wasted time, but spent too much time on it. So finally, I wanted to pick out this painting because it's perhaps one of her most moving paintings. This was a cod's head that she found on the beach and then took back, and the title of the painting comes from Dylan Thomas's poem "Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night," and I read the poem alongside it and found it very moving. It's a poem that I understand is often used at people's funerals as well, and for Gluck it was deeply personal, but I think it shows her technical mastery and her ability to handle the subtle colours as well. So in summary, I hope what I've done is just to give you a picture of Gluck's life in art through some of those paintings as a way of looking at her life. And as Gluck believed, a true artist, as she said, is a conduit open to any unexpected experience, and that an artist should be like a lightning conductor, remaining faithful to their beliefs and undeterred to the last. And for Gluck, she very much believed in her destiny as a painter. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gill. Would you come up, Diana, as well? And if anybody would like to ask questions.
Or not, we don't mind. Was it all right?
Okay.
I'm not doing that one.
Would anybody like to ask Diana or Gill a question?
I'd just like to ask Jill a quick question.
It's going to be the same one I'm going to ask her.
I hope not.
I've always seen all the images of Gluck.
So did I.
An amazing image of Gluck walking away, you said coming
I haven't
out.
seen that either. But the way
Yeah, you kept it secret.
Coming out of the studio
With the
holding
palette.
the painting with a cigarette. Where'd you find
We've
it?
never ever seen it.
Haven't you?
No.
Where'd you get it?
I don't. Well, I mean, it goes back to what I was saying about the pursuit of the life and the tracking. I think I became almost as obsessive as Gluck was about something, because for me, I want to have that sort of audit trail as much as I can to get close to have that conversation with. So it would. I can't remember now where I got it, but I could evidence it because I got out my file that, I mean, honestly, it's so anally retentive almost. I mean, that's probably the wrong way to describe it, but all these sections of the research that I've done, it will be in there somewhere. So,
Because it's not in the archive.
isn't it?
Not in the archive.
No, and it's an amazing image because also to see her head to toe.
I wonder now whether I saw it in Sussex.
What was
I
the
wonder.
painting she was holding? Do you know? Oh.
I can get back to it quickly. But I think this is what's so exciting about doing sort of biographical research. Those things, even with the work that Diana's done, there's still gaps.
Also, it's interesting how the same image we interpret in different ways.
Yes.
Some of us looking at dress, some looking at painting, biography, and the sort of interface between the two.
So you haven't seen this?
No.
This is fascinating.
Where did you find it?
But also, it encompasses everything.
Mm.
Very good.
It is. It's lovely, isn't it?
It's one
Well,
of the
I'm
few
glad
animated images we've seen as well, because nearly always Gluck is posed in a very contrived way.
Literally walking.
Yeah.
Her foot is out.
Wow.
Excuse me. Can I just ask? Is the studio still there? Yes. It is, but it's been altered. They've put a sort of railing on it. It's been a little bit spoiled.
but it's a separate house now.
So
that's a separate house.
sympathetic to the fact it was her studio.
I don't know. We went in the actual house, Bolton House, but it's been sold as a separate house now.
And Gluck Studio is still intact in Stenning, but we didn't get to see it, unfortunately, and the owner is... It's not easy, did you say? No, so, well, unfortunately, it was open, there's a festival in Stenning, and he opened it and had workshops there and lectures, and has since decided not to, so we didn't get to see it, which was really exasperating for us, because we were just like a few miles away. So we sort of stood and looked outside and over the wall, but we didn't get in, which was a shame, because it would have been lovely to have sort of experienced the space that Gluck worked in.
I mean, you're right about that. There was something quite special going into that space and walking around it and seeing the piano, and I suspect that may be where that came from.
And I'm going to pass to Jeffrey, because I think Jeffrey's one of the very few people, if the only person here, who actually met Gluck.
Well, I'm not sure I really met her. I used to see her walking along the pavement when I was I used to see her when I was at Stenning Grammar School as a boarder, and I used to see her there, and she was a striking figure for rather repulsive adolescent boys who thought she was something of a curiosity. And then, for some strange reason, there's been a sort of confluence with Gluck and my life subsequently, because I worked for a firm of antique dealers in the West End, where the Gluckstein family were buyers, and then and it rolls on and on and on. Gluck's doctor was my doctor when I was 8 and she was 80, and then Anne York was a friend of mine, and so it's a very odd experience. But I was just wondering whether you'd actually found any of the paintings that were shown at Stenning Grammar School in the gym. Because there's no list of them, which is tantalising, since I was probably in the gym at the same time. But anyway, so there we are. I wonder if anybody's found...
One small exhibition in Stenning. We didn't find any information about it, did we? And there wasn't anything in the local museum. No.
Well, I think there are other quite distinguished artists there, but I can't remember who the...
We didn't go to the school, though.
I'm sure this is working, actually.
Yeah.
Is it? Oh, good. Yeah. So, well, it's a tantalising problem. And I think that Scragg, he would be called Scragg, wouldn't he, my headmaster, and it's very Dickensian, and he got into trouble with Gluck because he wrote to her as... thanked her for her contribution as dear Miss Gluckstein or something, and there was a tirade back again, and it was suggested that he wrote the letter again, styling her as dear sir or madam, but I don't know whether that's recorded, but anyway, it is.
Did you come across any of the grammar school stuff? I mean, I was aware of it, but I couldn't find...
No, there's not a list. I've tried, and it's irritating.
No, we didn't. I mean, our trail was to try and find paintings that we could borrow. And yeah, you can become obsessed and go on and on, but
yes,
there's also a finite amount of time.
Well, and things have turned up, haven't they, Martin? You found great things, yeah. So that's all good stuff.
Approximately how many paintings are considered sort of lost? Is there like a sort of approximate figure?
Well, we don't know for sure how many Gluck painted. She wasn't prolific because of wealth. There wasn't an imperative to earn money. So Gluck took commissions when she wanted them. But there isn't a huge body of work. We know that some got destroyed when Gluck finished a relationship.
I think that was the saddest thing, this burning.
The burning.
The burning. It's always, anyone doing any biographical research...
It's the bonfire.
Thinking of the stomach when you hear that they're burning their past, because...
and historically, people have burned clothes as well when someone's died,
Yes. But that's the way of it. I mean, I don't think people live their lives thinking that events like this are going to happen and they mustn't burn.
Except I think Gluck did, because Gluck did preserve what Gluck wanted to preserve. And in the archive, there are masses and masses of documents. And there was a letter saying...
Yeah, in the event somebody writing a book, they need to reference this letter.
So Gluck was very aware of future eyes looking back. Yeah.
Much later that she became reflective like that.
The other thing is lots of...
Just on your point on the paintings, most of them are still held in private collections. This is a problem. and they didn't really go into public collections. So, which is one of the reasons Gluck's name is not as well known as a lot of artists. But paintings have, since the exhibition, have been coming up, but they're still held by private collectors, which is why.
And those private collectors, there's a man called Liechtenstein who collected a lot of them, but then when he died, they get dispersed. So you can't, unless things are in a museum, you can't. Well, you've said this, haven't you, about how fluid it is, you know, the research stuff that you have at your disposal, because things change.
And we were working in a project with very, very little funding. And for us, I mean, we were incredibly fortunate that the Fine Arts Society, at the time we thought, oh no, but actually it turned into a huge asset, was that they held an exhibition about 6 months before ours. Because the Fine Arts Society was Gluck's gallery, they had records of who owned her paintings, they borrowed them, and then were incredibly generous to us and forwarded our letters of our requests to the owners, which is how we got most of the paintings we did for the exhibition. But still, even then, even though they were in a fairly small geographic area, they took half of our total exhibition budget just couriering them to the museum. So, you know, we could have borrowed Miss Margaret Watts, but it was on a boat in Monaco, and we couldn't afford the courier trip. So even when we did trace some, you couldn't always, even if the person's willing to lend them to you, you just haven't got the funding to get them created and couriered by a fine art courier.
Another huge plus, though, about the whole research business was that her nephew, Roy Gluckstein, who was her executor, because she had quite a fractious relationship with her family, but he was an exceedingly generous and helpful, enabling executor. Wasn't
He was incredible.
And he didn't charge, you know, when I was doing everything, he didn't charge these production fees. He made the whole, everything that he could find, he made available. So there was this help, these wonderful...
Yeah, we were lucky because I think maybe Elizabeth introduced us to you and then you introduced us to Roy. And it is that sort of the personal introduction that makes all the difference. Roy was quite sort of disinterested almost. He recognised that Gluck was a great artist. He was fairly ambivalent because he felt that she was awful to his father. But he did recognise that he had a sort of care of duty and has had the art, since Diana's been, he's had all the papers archived. And with us...
Some of them have been removed, haven't they?
He's destroyed, he said he destroyed some letters, which is really upsetting. And it's a family archive, it's a living archive, things come, they go. So in our book we quote Diana quoting letters because when we went to the archive we couldn't find those same letters. We found other material. But Roy was incredible because he said, you can use this material as you wish. My only sort of caveat is that I read it before you submit anything, and my only interest is that it's factually true. The interpretation is your own. And I think for a family to do that it's quite generous and quite exceptional because, of course, there's the temptation to want to edit or to control a narrative.
He kept to that, didn't he?
He did.
And I think what impressed me was how tolerance works two ways, because it was, for this very proud, orthodox family, it was really quite something to have somebody as subversive as Gluck. And I think a lesser family might well have buried her, mightn't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly the personal relationships, and he actually didn't do that.
Jane.
Did Roy say, or did he give anything away as to why he wanted to burn certain things in terms of what the
Yes.
were?
Just in case everyone didn't hear, he said that there was some material that we couldn't see. And we had a whole conversation about it. He said Gluck wanted it destroyed, but the bottom line was if Gluck wanted it destroyed, Gluck was a controlling person. Why wasn't it destroyed prior to death? And we had a whole conversation. I felt I understood if it was personal. And then Martin had a really good idea, which was that they should put an embargo on it and say perhaps no one can look at the material for 50 or 100 years, but don't destroy it. And then we went one day a few months ago, and he sort of said, oh, well, I burnt them.
Oh, did she say?
Yeah. But then the strange thing was that we went to look at letters, and apart from the fact that they are impossibly difficult to read, we sat reading them and they were the most boring things ever. Like, I've written to you 7 times, you've only written to me 3 times. And I was like, oh. And then the last time we went back, we discovered some love letters that we would have referenced in the book. And we said to Roy, well, have you put some things back into the archive? And he said, no. So...
Haunted.
Yeah, it's... who knows? It's a family archive. Perhaps people come, put some... I don't know.
What I think is interesting, and Gill, I think you brought that out, is that how things connect, and then after a while, if it does all dovetail, you actually do make a life, and you do see the picture and the interconnections. And so even though certain details are missing, I do think that the whole trajectory of her life is well and truly there with all this work.
We're a small conference, which is good because it also means we can be discursive and conversational. We can talk over coffee, which is served in 2 minutes. But just before we finish, if people do want to talk to us about the exhibition, I also wanted to introduce Dr. Geoffrey Horsley, who worked on the exhibition with Martin and I. So the three of us did the exhibition. So you can also talk to Jeff about... He's going to talk about the exhibition, but he also did it. There was the three of us. I think we've got coffee served outside. We've got 15 minutes. And then we'll come back for the next session.